All right, and we're good to go with another edition of Art Convos. I'm here with superstar writer, artist, sex machine Travis
Keep it
Hemel.
going. Keep it going. Boost my ego more.
That's all I've got. I mean, you're good at drawing, writing, and sexing. Uh, you're not good at anything else, though. You're a terrible friend.
Uh,
Uh,
Jesus. Okay. Okay, Mr. Showcakes himself. Semi okay photographer. Whose only good photo is taken at Disney World with his friend on a camera phone, Mr. Buck Lightning.
man, I gave you compliments. You would just trash me.
At
And
first,
this
at
is this
first,
is
then you
this is
trashed
why
me.
this is why you're a terrible friend.
What do you know about being a good friend there, Buck Adam?
Uh, Not much if I'm around you. Anyway, so you can find Travis at artoftravishemel.com, HYMEL. And of course, as always, I'll have some graphics up telling you where to find us on the screen. How you doing, Travis?
But otherwise, I'm pretty good, man. How about yourself?
You just froze there, but otherwise we're pretty good too.
Oh, you literally. So yeah, the same with your video for a second.
Oh, we're gonna be in for a joyride this evening, folks. Let's get right into it. So, what can you say about Will Eisner, one of the uh, not just one of the legends of comic books? Will Eisner is on the short list of people who basically invented the modern American comic book genre, and I'm not talking about superheroes, which isn't primarily what he's known for. Uh, but literally, as an artist, just defined modern comics
Yeah.
for how long ago was that? Like 60 years at this point? 70 years?
Oh, long, dude. I think came out in either the 40s. I want to say, or maybe earlier than that, from when he was created. I can't. It has to be the 40s, I think.
Mm-hmm. Will Eisner's so important that just like the movies have the Oscars, television has the Emmys, comic books has the Eisner Awards. If you win an Eisner, it's not referring to the former head of Disney. It's referring to Will Eisner.
Yeah. So real quick, the character debuted in 1940.
Okay, so 70 years ago.
Yeah.
Wait, no.
We are not good at math, folks.
So so 60 plus 20, 80 years ago. Sorry.
And
Oh,
actually,
I'm sorry. Look,
I said
give me
one
a
thing. What a delayed
give
reaction
me a
you just
break.
had. What a delayed reaction. You just realized I insulted you like 5 minutes later.
No,
Anyway.
I did realize you were insulting me, but I was trying to figure out what the numbers were. You could have just been like,
Yeah.
if you knew what it was, you could have been like, no, Adam, it's 80 years.
Because I actually know I'm not great at math, so I'm not even going to bother.
Just go. Just talk about the comics.
So, you know what was interesting before we were going to do this? I saw on Amazon Prime, there's one of my favorite comic book documentaries came back for Prime viewing, which is called Comic Book Confidential. And they get numerous comic book creators talking there, and the whole documentary is about the comics industry from the start through mainstream to indie comics in the 60s and 70s, all the way to superhero comics back in the 80s. Because the documentary was made, I want to say in 87, 88. But what was interesting is Will Eisner's on it, and he talks about the creation of the Spirit. And he talks about when comics were starting to be popular, because originally comics were collections of funnies, like Sunday funny cartoon strips, hence the name comic, and it kind of stuck with that. He was contracted by I think he was saying a newspaper in the documentary to do a comic, and I think he had to tweak this because originally the Spirit was called something else. It wasn't like a masked hero type of thing, so he retooled it. But yeah, he ends up talking about his book, and they actually even have him narrate part of his comic and add motion to it. And this is 88, 87, 88. It was actually pretty cool to see. And he has going to Will Eisner himself in the Spirit, that's probably the most dynamic, one of the most dynamic comics of that time, and really pushes the art form for comics. Um, Will Eisner in general pushed the art form. He's written several books about creating sequential art or making comics, which I have one of his books. I've read one of his others I don't own, but it's those books themselves are a masterclass in how to make comics to elevate what you're doing into a whole nother art form. So I was pretty excited to do this. I would love to see what Dan's like when exactly Dan's work started to get an influence on this, because Dan did not always have that influence of Eisner, or unless that he already he had that and was more skewed
No,
towards a superhero aesthetic.
it's definitely his art. Dan Panosian's probably the best example of an artist who just completely changed his style. Like it's not even recognizable between
Yeah,
the two. But
I would love to see him do a Spirit story, actually, if he was to draw one.
well, I'll contact Scott over at Three Alarm, another great comic shop, Three Alarm Comics in Biloxi, because he had offered to put us in touch with Dan, and I love to have an art convos with him. But we're gonna go on from the cover, which incredible cover. But before we go into like these pages are obviously not the Spirit, but just to sort of recall that, and I'm not an expert on the Spirit. Actually, the one on the right probably no. Actually, no, they are both the Spirit. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah,
Um, but that sort of feeds into what I was going to say, is that the Spirit isn't a superhero comic. This was back when comics were more about men of mystery, um, which obviously can have like sort of superhero kind of stuff in it, with the exception of like Batman wasn't really a superhero when he was
yeah,
created. He was a man of mystery, and like the Mask and stuff like that. These are influenced by pulp novels, pulp comics, and that's very much what was being done here. Okay, folks, and we took a quick break there because we kept having freezing issues. So we're gonna try this strictly audio. Unfortunately, I think this is just an internet issue that we have, and that's just part of the game. But Travis, you were explaining pulp comics.
yeah. So like during the 1930s and maybe a little bit older than that, they had pulp magazines, and pulp just really refers to the cheap material that was used. And a lot of the stories and comics that you would see featured in these magazines, it was also just cheap bought work, that they would be in here. But typically, what you would find in these pulp comics is detective stories, horror stories, science fiction, that kind of nature. And when you get to, well, now that we know 1940, around this time, you have more, this comic. So you have the Spirit comic, which definitely harkens back to those pulp magazine days that Adam was talking about. But I just wanted to go over like what pulp meant, if anyone was kind of lost there.
If it helps any, and you can definitely see the influences here that led to it. The most well-known examples of pulp style stories are actually Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Like, even though those
Okay.
are vastly
Yeah.
different genres, they were both, particularly Indiana Jones. The influence is more subtle on Star Wars, because it's a different genre. But Indiana Jones, when you're looking at the pages that we're looking at here, you can definitely see where the similarities lie. But
Yeah, and also don't forget, like Conan the Barbarian was a pulp,
absolutely.
pulp book. Flash Gordon, as well.
Flash Gordon is arguably a much better example than Star Wars.
Even like famous writers that we know, like Ray Bradbury was a pulp writer for a while.
And I guess essentially what pulp as a style, because pulp, what you were saying about where the term pulp came from,
Yeah,
doesn't totally explain. I mean, it's an
yeah,
important.
fair enough.
It's an important. No, I'm not insulting you. I'm just saying, but pulp stories are essentially adventure stories. They're not the the superhero genre sprouted out of pulp stories, but the adventure is kind of the part of it. Like you could have like like a Han Solo is very much a pulp character. He's not a hero, but he's a man of action and adventure. So, but anyway, why don't we talk about these two gorgeous pages that we're looking at here?
So, just so you know, some of at least the first images that you see, those are actually one whole complete image on 2 pages. So they're interconnected. You just really can't tell too much because of the crease in the middle
Yeah.
between the 2 pages. But that's a whole complete piece. And I know for a fact we talked about storytelling this entire time, but I'm guessing this is just a cover for like for the books. This is just incredible. There's so much going on. You can tell that I don't know who that character in the red is, but you can tell that she has all this money, all these men want to come after her, and there's so much going on. From the left, you have a poster of the spirit. I can't think of his love interest's name, but she's standing against the poster. You have the police chief, and then you have all these guys all over this I guess like a femme fatale type of
Very
character.
much. Femme fatale is obviously like a big time trope in pulp stories.
Yeah,
It's the old trope of the gumshoe detective and the femme fatale that
yeah,
walks in, and they're always wearing like that sort of Jessica Rabbit dress.
yeah. And there's even a little bit of hint of even like these guys are in for trouble because there's a skeleton towards the bottom right of that platform that she's standing on. Also, if you didn't tell, that whole platform spells out spirit, which is a typical thing that you see a lot in spirit books, is that the title will be spelled out in intricate ways. And also, you even got a little bit of, I guess, I'm not trying to think of the word, but if you look on the very bottom right, you see a couple characters trying to escaping from this pit down there. So it's a whole nother level, a whole nother little dimension down there that he's adding to create depth. It's really just this is one of the reasons I chose this one to go with first, was because there's so many cool visuals going on.
Yeah, this particular page, and you're right. This probably was a cover for an issue. When I mentioned Indiana Jones, like it was the first thing that came to mind because you can see a lot of Raiders of the Lost Ark, like just from this like one page, and I'm assuming this came out before that movie, but yeah, like this, people weren't doing things like this back then. That's why Will Eisner, who, people talk about Jack Kirby and they're like, oh, he's always been underrated and didn't get enough of his credit, but people know Jack Kirby's name. Will Eisner's a name that you really have to be into comics to know who he is and what he did. Let's go on to the next one. This
So
is definitely a little bit older here, in 1972.
Well, on the left, real quick, that's actually looks like a preliminary drawing for what we had previously in the last slide.
Yeah.
I realized in the midst of taking the photo, I was like, oh, that's the prelim drawing. So I took a photo of that as well.
Okay, and these two pages are back to back as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can definitely see this is part of what it became, but first drafts are often like this, where he was trying to figure out exactly what to do. You can see the femme fatale is saying this is a comic book for adults only, and Eisner very much, I'll say hints at that if you look close enough at the drawing. He's giving a hint at something, but I'm gonna go right back real quick and look because yeah, her dress changes very much between that sketch and the finalized piece.
Yeah, it's just some cool things, and I thought that's like the cover next to the star thing. I just thought that was a really fun cover. Just really interesting, and also I think another reason I wanted to talk about that one because that was also featured in that documentary, Comic Book Confidential, because they go through a bunch of different art pieces talking about Will Eisner and his character, the Spirit. mostly focus on just the spirit, none of the other books that he did in his life.
Let's talk a little bit about the page next to it, and this is clearly a political piece. I feel like he mentions the name Robert Crumb. Well, he just says Crumb a couple of times on the page, and I think he's kind of trying to go for more of a Crumb aesthetic
Yeah,
with the art here. But this seems to be a commentary on the nature of comics in terms of like how adult they're allowed to be and breaking you know breaking with the rules of the what do you call it,
the comic code.
the Comics Code Authority. uh I'm assuming this is him saying they can go to hell. I guess.
Yeah, I just thought it was just like just a fun comical piece because the rest of these pieces are kind of, even though they might look kind of funny or whatnot, they're a little bit more serious and
Mm-hmm.
intricate.
All right, we're gonna move on to the next piece. Like you were saying earlier, the spirit often the there was no steady logo. They would include the name the spirit in the art somehow. And drawing something like this, I'm sure you can speak to it quite a bit. Um, with the various different focal planes,
Mm-hmm.
like how complicated it is it to come up with a piece like this?
I mean, I would imagine he went through, unless he already had this in his head what he was going to do. He probably went with a bunch of different layouts, trying to figure out where he wanted to start someone's eye and how he was going to incorporate the logo as well. Because we've talked about it before about guiding your eye across a page. If you look this to the top left, where his hand is gripping through like that opening to the street,
Mm-hmm.
that's where your eye would start, and you're kind of going down, and then you start to go where the water's hitting the top of the S, and you see this woman in peril, and then you start to go off to the right a little bit more and see a guy hanging. Go back to the left maybe, and you see wherever those creatures are that are trying to drag the spirit down. You go to the left, and then you eventually go to the right for the rest of that logo. Uh, he probably went through a bunch of concepts for this to get this perfect because it really does guide the eye. It's very interesting. It is telling a story. It's captivating, and that's really hard to do if you're just winging it. There's that unless he did it, that would be, I wouldn't be too surprised if he did that. But speaking for myself, this takes a lot of effort, especially like where the water is pouring out in parts of the logo. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you noticed that. You got a little bit of it. The logo is interacting with the environment, which is also really cool.
Right.
Um,
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of the various focal planes that you of the architecture, like keeping it all sort of in sync,
mm-hmm.
if you know what I mean. Like, something like this would be a lot harder to create a horizon line from which everything would sprout out because you
Yeah.
have like all these curves, along with like so the spirit logo is a flat plane. I just find it fascinating. And then when you get to the top, when you get to that ventilation point that he's trying to reach, that's another separate plane that has
Yeah.
to blend in, and it looks pretty seamless. I assume like if you were doing something like this, you would use SketchUp or something like that to.
Yeah, and also I think he might have fudged the perspective a little bit, because the perspective might not be 100% perfect, but he probably, when you know the rules, you can break them, and he probably did it a little bit to make it a little bit more interesting looking. Because if you're probably doing the normal perspective, things would look probably not as fluid, or not as good as what it is or what we're seeing in this page.
All right, going on to the next page. the spirit's looking disheveled. Quite a few of these pieces have had him with his shirt open. Um, there's a lot to see in this panel. But I think the best part is probably the reflection in the water.
Yep. That's
Now,
actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Like, not many people think about that stuff when they're doing art, like how your character's interacting with the environment, and it also adds character by having like rainwater where whatever that puddle is on the ground like that. It just adds a little bit more um, interesting things to look at on this, a little bit more texture, a little
now,
bit more lived in feel.
now, to be fair, you mentioned a second ago him fudging the perspective. That's probably the reflection would be more of his crotch
Yeah.
in if this was an actual photo, but you can, like you said, you can take liberties, and it's just the thought put into it. Even his signature there in the corner, right underneath the where the water is spilling out.
Yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead.
no, no, go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say even like even the foreground hands there, the hands that are there in the foreground. I think those are wherever that camera, because the camera that we're using or how we're seeing this is really from the point of view of the bad guy, in my opinion.
Oh,
And I
definitely.
think even the perspective is a little off for that too. Especially, it looks like he's gripping like a paper thin wall, because I should be able to see some kind of wall or a little bit more of an edge because of where those lines on the brick are going on the floor. Like I should be able to see a little bit more of that edge,
Right.
but it doesn't really matter. 'Cause, to be honest, this is when you know the rules and you can get away with breaking them. Um, and the only reason we're saying this is because I'm just over analyzing this and just looking at that and just actually trying to look for inconsistencies.
Well, there's also the fact that it where his left hand is doesn't make a lot of sense. It
Yeah.
looks like he's pulling himself up. Like there's no reason why but you're so drawn to, because the most gorgeous part of this illustration is the two hands.
Yeah.
Going on to the next panel, I've got a. I guess is that the spirit's girlfriend?
No, that's actually the same femme fatale, I believe, from that first
Okay.
thing that we see. Um, Thinking about it, I think the character's name is Pagel. It's like Pgell. And I know I'm not saying it right. And thinking
Yeah,
about
that
the what was that?
on that third page that we looked at, the sketch that
Yeah.
became it did say Pagel at the top in the corner.
Yeah.
So
So again, you got some cool stuff happening in here. You can kind of tell these guys are just watching them, basically beat up the spirit there. Like he's just getting pulled out of the water. Maybe they were drowning him. Who knows? But such a cool scene, and all that I believe is all watercolor for the actual color of this. Just to note that.
I think we've talked about this quite a bit on these episodes. Great art is often about the details, and if you look at ignore the beauty of what's going on in the foreground, if you look at the watercolor background where you get what I'm assuming is that the Golden Gate Bridge, or is that I'm not I was never sure where the spirit took place. I never read the
It looks
comic.
like more of like a New York,
Okay.
like a New York bridge.
So like George Washington Bridge or something like that. But if you look, you can see he went to the effort of actually painting what I guess would be the New York skyline, and it's very subtle, and it's completely unnecessary. Your eyes, if you're not staring at it, your subconscious notices it, but it's one of those things that your eye doesn't. And then you can look at, say, on the left side, the henchman that's over I guess that's the commissioner.
Yeah, Dolan as his name,
The
or the chief. The chief, yeah.
the henchman, you can see he went to the effort of adding some various reflection to the gun, including like an actual like little sparkling reflection.
A flare, yeah.
But even the reflections of the gunmetal. Uh, so I mean, and then he's got like all these henchmen that none of which is necessary. He could have
Yeah.
eliminated, quite a few foreground elements, but it all adds to the piece.
Yeah. And something that should be pointed out for a while when he draws these thug characters, all of them will look different, but you do see a common kind of like an archetype. Either they're kind of a round, wide head or more of a square style head that adds a lot of characteristic to these guys and make you think like a thug. Something to tell something to you, give you some context, and
Mm-hmm.
make you guess without having to be told, who these characters are.
Right. I mean, they all look like monsters to some degree or another.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. It's supposed to be like like a thug character, like a henchman.
We get to the next page, a double page spread, clearly a cover. I'd be very curious if he's ever talked about this. Like when he makes those spirit logos, the T is always separate from the rest of it, or is often separate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it probably depends on what he's trying to do with the design. I'm not really familiar with this piece, but um, it makes me like, especially the witch character in the background in the top right, makes me think of the EC comics. It's very eerie. A lot of that is the mood because of the way it's colored, and you're in this graveyard, and the way everything's rendered. And you also get the eerie glow of this treasure in the bottom, almost the bottom center on the page on the right, where this guy, I guess he's maybe like a grave digger or something, or something like that, where he's finding this treasure, and it just looks really ominous, really interesting, very spooky, very like EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt type of cover.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. This kind of shows off what you were talking about earlier about sort of narrative flow.
Mm-hmm.
Your eye would instantly be drawn to the spirit himself, then over to the witch with the logo, and then from there you would go down, uh, up until you get to the guy with the treasure. As a photographer, you would more design your panel so that you would be more drawn to the guy with the gold because of the color palette is a lot brighter than a lot of the subtle blues and shades.
Yeah.
But here, like this, like I said, like it's got a narrative flow, like you were talking about earlier. And then we have a Jesus Christ homage on the next page.
I mean, this is actually one of my favorite pieces in this book. It is very incredible. It makes me think that, in terms of the story, that these bad guys have either like tricked the spirit into doing something. Like, he's looks like he has supposed to have a weight on top of him, and maybe he's going to jump off the bridge and drown. I don't know what's supposed to happen exactly, but it's such a cool cover. Especially with all the different faces, all the different types of bad guys on the left. Then you have the amazing detail. If you look on the right page, the lower left-hand side, you can actually see like warehouses, and then on the river, and then the cityscape in the background. Like all that extra detail just kind of cements you into this world.
What I'm curious of is if this is so the spirit's blinded here. He's not wearing his typical mask. He's got a blindfold on, and if you look at the various people, most of them their eyes are obscured to a degree, and I'm curious if it's some sort of like blind leading the blind metaphor
Could
or
be.
something like that. But I agree with you. This might be the best looking panel that we've seen so far. Or it's not a panel. It's the best
Yeah, I
looking
got you.
splash. The best looking splash page. And it's hard to we never talked about this, but like watercolors in particular are a very temperamental coloring style. Like it's because they're paints, they tend to bleed, it takes a lot of practice, especially when you're doing like details, to make something like this look the way it does.
It's incredible.
Next page is very old school kind of gumshoe. Like he's in his trench coat in a downpour.
Yeah, I mainly picked this one because of how, to me, looking at this and thinking of how I would do it, so difficult because you're doing this traditionally, and also you're tasked with portraying water and rendering water with different reflections. You know, you could actually almost hear the rain hitting his jacket because of, you can see all that texture on his shoulders and hat, and literally pouring down the sides of it onto him. That really is a very challenging piece. Even like for the water, like the fire hydrant behind him is all completely soaked and has like portraying where the water would run down it. That's a big challenge.
It looks like he might have taken something like a comb or something like that and sort of
Yeah.
before everything dried, just kind of because when you're looking at those strokes, um, he had to be using something to get
Yeah.
like them so even and
It's uniform.
let's see. Next page, beautiful women. Also, a hint of adulthood on the woman in green.
Yep.
I assume these are the various women and femme fatales in the
Yeah.
spirits world.
And this is just cool. So, what was interesting about this book, the way it was formatted, I kind of liked it. I guess they were doing more pinups or other covers, and they were going to do it bigger than just putting it on a page. And obviously, you can see I turned the book at this point to take these photos, and I couldn't take a lot of them because there's kind of some risque kind of photos. I'm sorry, pieces in this book. So I kind of was trying to pick, ones that were still looking great, but also kind of fit for what this video podcast is. So yeah, this is one of the many that feature the femme fatales of the spirit. Um, he also loved drawing gorgeous women, very very sexy looking women. But what I really liked about this is, again, you have a whole another kind of dimension to it by having the spirit climb through that little that square hole in the floor, with the rope. I just it adds a lot more to that piece.
Um, what I'm struck by is, probably maybe the next art convo that we do, maybe on. I have an art book by Bruce Timm. And Bruce Timm is often uh, compared to Jack Kirby, who he was, from what I understand, a direct student of.
Yeah,
He worked underneath Kirby at some point. But looking at the Will Eisner's women, you can definitely see that Bruce Timm, at least in terms of like women, was very much influenced by Eisner as well.
yeah, I definitely could see that. So for this next one, this would be the last spirit one that we're gonna have on here. This kind of reminds me of like Indiana Jones in the way the spirit looks right here, the torn shirt, because I can think of what is it, Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones. It kind of reminds me of that. But you have these two bad guys who are punched out. You even have this other bad guy who's still in the water, climbing on top of the T of the spirit logo. Um, it's even actually, if you go, even I didn't even notice it till now. Towards the top, you have Dolan and his assistant, which uh, does probably draw some criticism today, but his partner would be Ebony White. So you have this African American character. That and was a Chief Dolan.
Oh, I didn't know what that was, to be honest with you. It actually kind of looks like a short talkie tawny or something like that, like a little tiger. Yeah, that's well, it was a different time period. draft.
Oh yeah, for sure. Sorry, I cut out for a second. Yeah, for sure. So this last little bit, we don't have to talk about these. I just want to include this, and the reason I want to include these last, like if you can see if we're on the same thing, these illustrations along with this story, almost like poetry. It's like really poetry. Is the last part of this book? It's called The City. It's a very tiny bit, even though this was called again Will Eisner's Color Treasury. Almost 90% of it was the spirit, and this last little bit was some illustrations. Now, Will Eisner did other comics besides the spirit. I think another one he's known for a book is like My Contract with God, if I'm saying it right. That's another book, but he's also done things like this where it reminded me of the art convo where we talked about Darwin Cook, and in particular was the book, I think it was Parker that you were showing, and was that the name of the book I'm thinking of?
Yeah, well, Parker's the character, but there's various stories. But
Yeah.
go on.
So for that book, we were talking about that wasn't a normal comics format. You would have an illustration and kind of a story to go on, written dialogue next to it that would fill out.
It was a blend of prose and comic illustration.
And that's really what this kind of is to me. Again, you don't have to spend too long, but you can kind of see it's nice, really interesting. Like I'm on the Predators right now, but these really interesting illustrations to go with that poem on the left hand side of it. And then lastly, you got this is again part of this prose section of the book, and this big illustration of the city, and there's so much detail, this pen and ink detail of the city, the slum that's kind of depicted here. And I just thought that was an incredible piece. This is the very last page in here, if you're not there yet.
Yeah, no, I am. Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
And as beautiful as these illustrations were, they're kind of the same subject matter, so I didn't do too many of these, obviously. But they are very interesting, and they're that's very exaggerated. You don't get a lot of really straight lines in here. You got all kinds of textures used in this compared to what you saw with the watercolor, because this is more of a pen and ink drawing. He's going to do a lot more of that texture work with the pen and ink versus using colors to achieve that goal.
Yeah, I mean, a piece like this had to take days.
Will Eisner is a genius. Honestly, he's a master of that art form.
So, is there anything else you want to say about this book before we close out?
Last thing I do, if you're interested in this, he does have, interested in Will Eisner stuff. That his stuff you can actually find, the Spirit reprints of the Spirit if you're interested in finding the story. He has other books out there. A Contract with God is one of them. If you're looking for this art book in particular, this is obviously out of print. I was lucky to come across this in person. However, I know for a fact, because I was out of curiosity before this, I looked to see if you can get it on eBay, and you can at reasonable prices, depending on condition, from $10 to $20 off of eBay, which I think, depending on the condition, is a really good deal. It's an out of print book. Some apparently were signed as well. They're going to attract a little bit more money there, but if you're looking just to kind of collect and have something on your shelf like this, you can just get away with $10-15.
It is worth noting, if you do look up the Spirit, there's going to be two different two separate.
Oh yeah.
Basically, the modern era Darwin Cook, who was a big time student of. Well, I don't know.
Which is worth the read as well. I actually own those as well. They're worth the read.
But just to be sure, you know what you're looking at. Like the Darwin Cook ones are separate from the. They're very much obviously in the vein of the original Spirit stories, but
because it's bounced across different publishers over the years. The Spirit in general, because I think it was like National Comics or something. I forget what it was. What had it. Kitchen Sink printed it for a while, then DC, and now I think. Maybe I know Dynamite for sure. Maybe IDW. But Dynamite for sure had this, I guess, the rights to it from the Eisner estate or whoever has the rights. I have no clue.
Well, all right. So I guess that's going to do it for this episode. I do want to remind everyone that I currently have a Kickstarter for my photography book about New Orleans. It's called "The Party Is Over: New Orleans in Lockdown." I'm going to put up the banner now, and please go out, check it out. If you're, like if you like it and you want to contribute, I appreciate that. But even if you don't, if you share the project, that would help me tremendously. I need to get it out to as many people as possible. And Travis, where can they find you one more time?
So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Travis underscore Hemel. That last name is spelled Hymel. You can also search Travis Hemel, Hymel, on YouTube and find my YouTube channel where I post these draw card videos where I draw homages to trading cards. And also, of what I'm going to do lately is post some more tips about drawing comics digitally and also go over some traditional art supplies and some books. My most recent one is How to Draw the Marvel Way, where I talk about that book in particular as a drawing tool for hobbyists or intermediate people who want to learn about drawing comics. Because that particular book's a great tool to start out with to kind of understand how you would make these comics in the basic sense of it.
Also, if you go to Travis's YouTube channel, which neither one of us has enough followers to have a direct URL, unfortunately. So you're just gonna have to go to Travis Hymel. Just search for
Yep.
that. You can find some live streams that we've done together, which, these videos are a lot more serious. Aside from whatever banter we have in the beginning.
Yeah.
But those videos can go back and forth. We try to have a good time on it and be a little less serious. We do talk about art more as Travis is drawing, live drawing during the videos. Uh, but those are interesting too. So if you want to go check those out.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that, Adam.
But all right, folks, thank you, and be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.
See ya.